good morning, or good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. My name is Daryl Camp, and I am the president of the California Association of African American Superintendents and Administrators. I want to welcome everyone to our first national virtual Roundup event. For those of you in California, you may be aware that CAAASA, or the California Association of African American Administrators or Superintendents and Administrators, has been in existence since 1993 and became CAAASA in 2007. With that in mind, we've undergone tremendous changes to the organizations over the years, and we're happy to have reached the stage that we are today, where we fight to build partnerships and coalitions that advocate for improving conditions to better the educational outcomes and experiences for African American students and other students of color. We have been engaged in several initiatives over the years, and one of which has been an annual roundup. Every year in September, we hold an annual roundup to convene California educators and those that are connected to education or our educational stakeholders. It's been an event that started in the backyard of our executive director, Dwight Bonds, and over the years has morphed to a restaurant setting and hotel setting in Long Beach, and this is our first virtual roundup. So I'm excited that you've decided to join us for this event this morning, no matter where you're from, California or the various states throughout the nation. So what I'm going to do is to just tell you a little bit more about CAAASA, and then we'll share what the program will consist of this morning, and then we'll get right into the program. So once again, I told you a little bit about CAAASA. We once again been in existence since 2007 or 93 originally, and over the years we've developed our outreach efforts to include a major event, the Roundup in September, and then traditionally we have a professional development summit that we host in March every year. Because of the pandemic, this year we've had to make some changes, and you'll begin to see some information about our professional development summit, which will be in May this year due to the pandemic. We also host a series of leadership academy events where we bring together those that are in administrative positions, and we have a dialogue with some of the best superintendents throughout the state of California, where we talk about and we network regarding our experiences as African American leaders in the educational setting, and we share strategies about what we can do to improve our situations and, of course, the systems in which we serve. So once again, those leadership academies are held about 2 or 3 times throughout the year. Our next one will be in October. You saw it in the flyer in the intro. October the 3rd will be our next Leadership Academy. We also have been spearheading this year what we're calling the Casa Committees. What the Casa Committees are they're an opportunity for you as educators to, 1, be a member of CAAASA, and then 2, to become engaged with CAAASA through one of our many initiatives. This year, we've established 5 committees, and we hope that you decide to join one of those committees as a way of strengthening our organization, and once again, to work in partnership with other educators of like minds to strengthen the educational outcomes for our African American students and for other students of color throughout the state and nation. The first committee, Professional Development for Classrooms, will focus on the teaching, learning, assessment, and professional development process, and how do we strengthen educators in the classroom. So that might be a committee that you're interested in. Right along with Professional Development for Classroom, our second committee focuses on building the leadership capacity of educational leaders. So once again, if you're interested in working with other educators and strengthening other educational leaders, then that might be the committee for you. In that committee, we focused on sharing and mentoring and coaching so we can develop this pipeline, the strong pipeline of assistant principals and directors and assistant superintendents, and then eventually superintendents. Many of you know that in California, African Americans African American students make up about 6% of our over 6 million students in California. So roughly 6% of our students are African American, and of our superintendents, African American superintendents, we're right around between 2.5 and 3%. So we're right around 28, 30 superintendents are African American in California. So we want to increase that. We want to double that. And the way that we're focusing on doubling that number is to get more African Americans in the pipeline, and then to share strategies of how to be successful once you get to these leadership positions. Our third committee group will be focusing on legislative advocacy. And legislative advocacy is definitely a part of education. I know many people say, I don't like politics, I went into education. Politics is all throughout education, and we want to make sure we have a voice at the table. So legislative advocacy is our third committee. We also have a committee focused on membership and what can we do to engage CAAASA memberships to strengthen our organization and then to support CAAASA and our students as well. And then our last but not least committee is led by CAAASA's president-elect at this time. That'll be Dr. Michelle Bowers, and she leads the National Coalition on Education Equity. So we hope to build that out over the years too. And if you want to be a part of building that, please sign up for one of our committees. You'll probably get an email at the end of this event asking you if you would like to participate in those committees, and you do need to be a member to participate. So that is CAAASA in a nutshell. Our program this morning is going to be exciting. It's going to be full of a lot of information. And our only intent is to make sure that we're working in partnership. We're sharing strategies and ideas that will improve the conditions in education across the nation for our African American students. We know that we want students' academic achievement to go up, and we want to keep our kids in the classroom. So we want our suspensions and expulsions to go down. We want to support our students in any way we can. And of course, when we talk about just supporting our African American students, we're really talking about supporting all the students that are underserved in our educational system, no matter what their racial background. So we're going to start off this morning with some remarks from our federal policymakers. I'm excited today that we're going to have remarks from Congresswoman Karen Bass. And as many of you know, Congressman Bass was a vice presidential candidate just about a month ago. So we're excited to have her remarks. We're also excited to have Congressman Bobby Scott from Virginia join us again. He's been instrumental in working with CAAASA on keeping us abreast of and aware of some of the legislative issues that are going on at the federal level. So he's going to join us this morning. And then from our state, we have Senator Holly Mitchell. Holly Mitchell will join us and actually will be in one of our breakout sessions. And we'll have one of the most powerful assembly members in the California legislature, that would be Dr. Shirley Weber. So I'll tell you more about them as we get into those breakout sessions. So roughly this morning from 9 to 10:30, we'll have remarks from those policymakers. And then we're going to go into some breakout rooms from 10:30 to 11:30. So those breakout rooms, you've already pre-selected those sessions, I believe, and you will receive the link, or you have received the link to go directly to those breakout rooms. Those are essentially a separate breakout room from this room that we're currently in. Then when we come back around 11:30, we're going to have some closing remarks by CAAASA's president-elect, Dr. Michelle Bowers, and we're also going to have remarks from Daniel Lee, or Dr. Daniel Lee, the Deputy Superintendent for Equity for the California Department of Education. And we're honored to have one of a longtime supporter of CAAASA and just been a power player throughout the state, nation, and internationally. That would be Dr. Linda Darling Hammond, who's president, of course, of the Policy Learning Institute. and the State Board of Education as well. So it's exciting, and I'm always interested to hear from Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond. She is a rock star in education and definitely has been a supporter and friend of CAAASA over the years. So before we get into our first speaker, I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you. Not only am I the president of CAAASA, but I serve as the superintendent of schools for the San Lorenzo Unified School District in the Bay Area in Alameda County. And I want to thank my Board of Education for supporting me in my role as CAAASA's president as well. I want to thank the CAAASA board for all the work that they're doing, and particularly our executive board. That would be Dr. Michelle Bowers as the president-elect, Dr. Mark Marshall as our treasurer, Dr. Tanya Fisher as our secretary, and serving as our executive director is Mr. Dwight Bonds. He's really helped to grow the organization over the years with the help of a tremendous staff. I know Michael Dennis has been alongside CAAASA over the years and works behind the scene to strengthen the organization, and all the other staff members that are with CAAASA. So thanks again for all that you have done. And I also want to point out that this event is free to you, but it's not free. And I want to say thank you to all of those sponsors who have supported this event and a number of CAAASA events over the years. So thank you again to all of those sponsors. You'll hear from some of them. Some of them will have a message during the breakout sessions, and please just pay attention to their logos, and we do what we can to support them because they definitely support us. Thank you again. So it's my honor this morning to move on with the program. I'm going to introduce Karen Bass. Unfortunately, she couldn't be with us this morning. She does have a video. As many of you know, Karen Bass, or Congresswoman Bass, represents California's 37th district and is in her 5th term. In addition to serving on several committees in Congress, she is also the chair of the 55-member Congressional Black Caucus. Prior to her election to Congress, she served in the California Assembly, where she made history as the first African-American woman elected to the position of Speaker of the Assembly. A strong advocate for social change, 3 decades ago, she convened a group of community organizers and founded Community Coalition, an organization with a mission to help transform the social and economic conditions in South Los Angeles. Congressman Bass once again is unable to be with us. She notified us just recently that she was unable to be with us, but she did prepare a videotape message. Please join me in listening to Congresswoman Karen Bass.
Hello everyone. I'm happy to be here with you today, even if the only way I can be here with you is virtually. I look forward to the day when we can all meet again and gather again in person. I want to thank you for the work that you do educating the young people in our communities. We really are facing a challenge now. Now, we always talk about the achievement gap in normal times. I am deeply, deeply concerned about what the achievement gap will be when this pandemic is over. Over 190,000 dead Americans, and we know that a sizable percentage of those are African American. And now, with COVID spreading to young people, because of the lack of leadership at the top, I worry that those statistics are going to change and we're going to find more and more people in our communities impacted. Well, what on earth is the achievement gap going to be when this pandemic is over? When our kids have been out of school for what might even be an entire school year? And I know we're all trying to do distance learning and virtual learning, but is that really working for our kids? Is that working in our communities? Those are questions that I know that you will be taking up today. But while you're taking up those questions, I am hopeful that we are going to have a new administration in January, and we'll actually have a Department of Education, because that is not what we've had for the last few years. But we need to be proactive, and we need to think about what extra needs to be done to close what is already an achievement gap. We need to figure that out, and I think we need to be bold, I think we need to be strong, and I think we need to be quick and prepare that for when the new administration comes in. On behalf of the Congressional Black Caucus that I'm honored to chair, we have been working very hard on COVID and specifically about the disproportionate impact. Now, we're proud that one of our most senior, one of our most esteemed members, Representative Bobby Scott, who chairs the Committee on Education and the Workforce, I know he will be leading the way on a national level, and we could all use your input. The Congressional Black Caucus has also been working on the census, and we only have a couple of more weeks to turn in your census forms. And you know how important that is for educational resources down the line. And voting this year, I do believe the only way we would wind up with this same administration would be through voter suppression. And so one of the things that I hope you discuss today is the need for us all over the country. We need to know how to vote. We need to make sure that all of our people know what the rules are in their particular state. And then we need to make sure that people turn in their ballots early. We have seen that this administration will go to any lengths, even slowing down the mail in the post office. I tell you, who would have thought of that? Well, we don't know what dirty tricks they will come up with, which is why we need to make sure that our people know how to vote in a particular state and that they vote early and turn their ballots in. The Congressional Black Caucus has been working for years on policing issues, and we were successful with the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, successful on that bill leaving the House, and now we need to put maximum pressure to make sure it is voted on in the Senate. You know that the Congressional Black Caucus has always been on the forefront of criminal justice reform, and this year we've paid particular attention, in addition to policing, particular attention to how women are involved in the criminal justice system. And needless to say, since the last war on drugs was launched, there is an 800% increase in the incarceration rate for Black women. We've even had to take up the issues, and this is a tragic issue, but of Black youth committing suicide at incredible numbers. That just gives you an overview and a glimpse of some of the work of the Congressional Black Caucus. Let me thank you again for your leadership. We count on you, we depend on you to tell us what we need to be doing legislatively on a federal level. But know that you have the Congressional Black Caucus that stands in solidarity with you. And we are so fortunate that one of our most leading members, Representative Bobby Scott, I know you'll hear from in a few minutes, but you talk about the best person in the House of Representatives who could lead on education. And we are proud to say that he is a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Congresswoman Karen Bass. Once again, we were honored that she decided to join us this morning, even if it's a recorded video. She has been purposeful in working with us, and we know in CAAASA that we need to work together in partnership at all levels, federal, state, and local levels, in order to improve the educational outcomes and conditions for our students and any student that's underserved in our educational system. I'm honored also to introduce our next speaker, Congressman Bobby Scott. And Congressman Bobby Scott, I just want to say thank you. And then for those of you that don't know, you might want to look it up too. Congressman Scott is a member of Sigma Pi Phi, also known as the Boule. And I say, welcome, fellow Archon.
Thank you, Daryl. And for those on the East Coast, good afternoon. Those in other time zones, good morning. I want to first thank the California Association of African American Superintendents and Administrators, the LA County Alliance of Black School Educators, and the National Coalition on Education Equity for hosting this critical gathering of our school communities. I also want to thank Dwight Bonds for inviting me back to this year's roundup. And finally, I want to recognize the other speakers for this opening session, Congresswoman Bass, Assemblywoman Weber, Senator Mitchell, for their legislative work in support of African American students and all students, and in fact, especially during this pandemic, and Linda Darling Hammond for her leadership in educational policy. In fact, looking at this list, I'm reminded of that old man who, as a child, survived the Johnstown flood. It was a big flood, and he survived it as a young child, and he loved telling the story about how big that flood was. And as he got older and older, he noticed that there are fewer and fewer people who could actually validate the facts. And he took full advantage of that, and that flood got bigger and bigger. And as an old man, he finally passed, showed up at the pearly gates, and said, St. Peter, I want to tell the story about the Johnstown flood. And St. Peter said, that's fine, we'll get everybody together and you can tell the story about this flood. But as you tell the story, remember that Noah will be in the audience. Well, you have me speaking on the same program right after Karen Bass, who has chaired the CBC so well that she was able to get 98% of the Democratic caucus to co-sponsor the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And she was almost, as you pointed out, almost our next vice president. Speaking before Linda Darling-Hammond, who knows more about educational policy than anybody in the country, two legislators. I understand you're going to have a tribute to John Lewis. So with all that firepower on there, I'm not sure why you bothered to invite me, but I'll do the best I can in saying a few words about education. Earlier this year, we celebrated the 66th anniversary of the Supreme Court's landmark decision in Brown v. Board of Education, which declared that in these days, it is doubtful that any child may reasonably be expected to succeed in life if denied the opportunity of an education. Such an opportunity is a right which must be made available to all on equal terms. And the court concluded that separate schools are inherently unequal. Regrettably, equity in education is still not a reality. According to a 2016 GAO report, our schools are now more segregated than they were in the 1960s. And we know that schools serving predominantly students of color face a $23 billion racial funding gap compared to schools serving predominantly white students. Funding gap means that students of color are disproportionately attending high poverty schools with less access to resources, qualified teachers, and advanced casework. Ultimately, this is translated into a national achievement gap. We also face a discipline gap because we know that students of color are much more likely to be suspended than their peers for committing the exact same infraction. And as you know, unnecessary suspensions are a key factor behind the school to prison pipeline. Over the past 6 decades, Congress has tried to address this persistent educational inequity, almost guaranteed, because we generally fund public education through the property taxes. So in 1965, Congress passed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESEA, which recognized that to address funding disparities, we have to invest in low-income areas, and that's done through Title I of the Act. Next, Congress passed the No Child Left Behind Act, which recognized that beyond just investing the money, you have to actually measure the achievement gaps. My business friends tell me that you can't manage what you don't measure. Unfortunately, the law was so poorly implemented that everybody wanted to get rid of it. So 6 years ago, we passed the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, which gives states and localities more flexibility on how to assess and address achievement gaps, not whether, but how to assess and address achievement gaps. Unfortunately, I remain concerned that the Department of Education has not been aggressive enough in holding states and localities accountable for adequately confronting their achievement gaps. This Congress, the House Education and Labor Committee, is also taking a long overdue step to confront segregation in education. Last April, we held what I understand was the committee's first hearing on school segregation in roughly 3 decades. This hearing set the stage for the committee to advance 2 bills, which I'm pleased to report the House is expected to pass on the floor this coming week. The first bill, the Equity and Inclusion Enforcement Act, restores students and parents' private right of action to bring lawsuits against policies which may not have been intentionally discriminatory, but definitely have a racially disparate impact. In 2001, the Supreme Court, in a decision called Alexander v. Sandoval, the Supreme Court struck down the individual's private right of action to challenge such discriminatory policies and practices. This right had been available for decades, but as a result, many victims of discrimination in education today cannot hold school districts accountable for policies and practices that have a clear effect of denying access to quality education based on race unless the case is brought by the Department of Education. And we know it's very clear this Department of Education is not bringing such cases. The Equity and Inclusion Enforcement Act restores that private right of action. It also creates Title VI monitors, similar to Title IX monitors that everybody has in their schools, to ensure that every school has at least one employee responsible for carrying out the responsibilities of Title VI, including investigating complaints of discrimination based on race, color, or national origin. Similar to Title IX, the bill also creates an assistant secretary in the Department of Education to coordinate Title VI enforcement of equity and inclusion in education. Second bill is the Strength in Diversity Act. It's been introduced by Congresswoman Marcia Fudge of Ohio. This bill provides resources to help public school districts who want to voluntarily develop community-driven desegregation plans. This includes support for the development and maintenance of best practices. This technical assistance is required because a few years ago, the Supreme Court struck voluntary school integration plans in Seattle and Louisville. And so this grant program will help districts develop effective programs that can withstand constitutional challenges. This program is based on a program the Obama administration started in 2016, a small little $30 million national grant program called Opening Doors, Expanding Opportunities, to help those districts implement voluntary school integration plans. However, one of Secretary DeVos's first actions in office was to terminate that small grant program before any money could be dispensed. The Strength and Diversity Act updates and codifies the grant program so it is not subject to the whims of changing administrations. The committee has also advanced the College Affordability Act, a proposal to overhaul the higher education system, which would confront the nation's chronic shortage of Black and brown teachers. College Affordability Act would make college more affordable generally and would also strengthen teacher preparation programs to help recruit and retain Black and brown teachers. Now, one of our most important priorities, of course, is the elimination of the achievement gap. But those efforts to close achievement gaps have been complicated by the COVID-19 pandemic. As you know, the switch to distance learning has only exacerbated pre-existing achievement gaps for students of color, low-income students, English language learners, and students with disabilities. In response, the committee is working to provide schools the resources they need to improve virtual learning and to safely reopen schools for full-time in-person instruction. We all want to reopen our schools for full-time in-person instruction because it's better for academic achievement. It's better to address the achievement gap. It's better for access to nutrition because students have access to school meals. It's better for social and emotional learning. And it's better for the detection of child abuse because the students are in school. And let's be serious, you're not going to open the economy until we open the classroom. So we need to reopen our schools if it can be done safely. However, without significant federal funding, most schools simply cannot open safely because they cannot afford the measures necessary for safely reopening. This includes everything from buying personal protective equipment and cleaning supplies, securing additional transportation services so students aren't riding on crowded buses, and also includes refiguring classrooms to allow for social distancing and repairing school ventilation systems. The CDC has identified adequate ventilation systems as an essential element for reopening schools safely. And yet the GAO reported just a few months ago that 4 in 10 school districts need to update or replace heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems in at least half their school buildings. All of these measures are critical for safely reopening schools and keeping them open, but none of them are free. And so state and local governments are facing, it's still worse, state and local governments are facing massive budget shortfalls that are projected to total more than $1 trillion nationally. And so without federal support, these shortfalls will require cuts to public education, in the range of $300 billion nationally and caused massive teacher layoffs. More than 900,000 public school employees have already lost their jobs, and a total of 1.4 million could eventually lose their jobs. Regrettably, the current administration's only plan is just to tell schools that they need to reopen or we'll cut your funding. That is not a plan. Instead, Congress must pass the plan that the Democrats passed in the HEROES Act, which passed almost 4 months ago. This proposal will provide about $1 trillion for state and local relief to prevent deep cuts to public education, as well as an additional $100 billion for direct educational aid. The House has also passed an infrastructure package, the Moving Forward Act, which includes $130 billion for school construction to repair unsafe school buildings, which could include ventilation systems. Nearly 4 months later, the need is even greater. The Senate proposal, which was defeated on Thursday, was totally insufficient. The bill provided no state and local relief to avert deep cuts to education funding and only offered enough money for education to cover about 1/3 of the projected cuts to education. Of that money, the bill dedicated $7 billion for private schools, which had already received about $4.5 billion under the Paycheck Protection Plan aimed at businesses, and created another $10 billion private school voucher program. Worst of all, the Senate proposal reserved 2/3 of the K-12 funding only for schools that physically reopen. This would unfairly penalize schools in communities that cannot open because of local infection outbreaks, and would also create an impossible chicken and egg situation for schools that need the money to reopen, but can't get the money until they reopen. And so I'm sure that you'll agree that supporting schools is not a partisan or political issue. It's about protecting the health of our students and staff. If we fail to do all we can do, those students at the bottom of the achievement gap will just get further behind. So please continue to make your voices heard, and thank you again for all you do for our students.
Thank you, Congressman Scott. I really appreciate, and I hope you appreciate too, how we can't afford just to be educators if you're in the classroom or if you're running a school or a school district. We have to be active in legislative advocacy efforts at the federal and state level. It's all connected. When Congresswoman Bass talked about the connection between the census and representation in Congress and funding, that's connected. That's educational politics at its best right there. And Congressman Scott went through the litany of legislation connected to COVID-19 and how that will impact our communities. So we have to continue to be advocates. We have to, work beyond our I tell people I have to work beyond my 13, 14-hour day in order to be involved in these efforts. But it's worth it too. Having 2 kids in the public school system, and I anticipate having grandkids there too. I'm going to keep working for a long time to make sure that we get the best for our students, because we know that's not the case right now. So thank you again, Congressman Scott, for your leadership. So now that we've heard from our congressional representatives, now we're going to bring it a little bit more local at the state level. It's my honor to introduce our next speaker, a speaker that I just have a great deal of admiration for all the work that she's done. Many of you have heard her before. And if you haven't, you're in for a treat this morning. Joining us next will be Dr. Shirley Weber, who since 2012 has served California's 79th Assembly District. She's an advocate for children and families. A major portion of her work has been in the legislature and has been focused on education, including pre-K through 12 education and higher education. Along with her work in the state legislature, Dr. Weber serves as the chair of the California Legislative Black Caucus. So we've had the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and now we're going to hear from Dr. Weber, who is the chair of the California Legislative Black Caucus. Additionally, Dr. Weber is a professor emeritus of Africana Studies at San Diego State University. Many of you know that Dr. Weber was one of the lead authors and advocates for promoting an ethnic studies curriculum, not only in K through 12 education, but at higher education. I think in the next few months or years, we're going to have a graduation requirement that includes ethnic studies. So she's a tremendous resource, a friend. I just can't say how much we benefit from her leadership as educators in California. She is willing to say what other people won't say and do what other people won't do for the sake of our students. Lastly, I'm just going to say thank you for her leadership, not only on the ethnic studies model curriculum, but on AB 1835, which is a bill that will track and keep those supplemental and concentration funds locally in California for the targeted group of students that they were intended to keep, to be utilized for. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, hey, we have to vote. Proposition 16 is another bill that is authored by Assemblymember Weber. It is basically the bill to overturn Prop 209. So I'm sure she's going to say something about that. If you don't know what 209 is, Google it. if Dr. Weber has not done so. With that, I will be quiet and I will bring forward to you Dr. Shirley Weber. And once again, Dr. Weber, thank you again for being at CAAASA events and just for all you do, even outside of CAAASA events. Welcome.
Well, thank you. And I feel very welcome, feel very at home. I've been to most of your conferences since I've been in the legislature. And I want to thank Dwight and you for inviting me always to be a part of it. Whatever I'm doing, I try to stop to make sure that I'm an advocate for education, because I know that it is truly the American equalizer. And it changes lives. It's changed mine. It's changed yours. It's changed an awful lot of individuals who, despite the racism and the circumstances under which they were born and the conditions under which they lived, education became their way up and their way out. And it keeps reminding us every day that we have that same opportunity or responsibility to do for others. And I want to thank those of you who are online. It's good to see so many of you who are basically still committed and still engaged, despite the fact that we're not at a hugging and a touching moment, but we are nonetheless at a moment that brings us all together and helps us to focus very clearly on the challenges we face and the opportunities that are still there for us to move forward. I'm grateful for being able to be here today as an author of ACA 5, as the author of 1460, and so many other bills that are extremely important to this state and this nation, as well as to African Americans. I was asked to come here today to talk about really the issue of equal opportunity and access, and to remind folks of what Proposition 209 has done to us as a people, and what the opportunity lies for us to begin to talk about reversal of it. So I've been asked to come on that behalf, also to address just some broad issues with regards to, as you begin to go into your workshops and begin to get focused, some issues as a result of this pandemic, and as a result of the kind of ongoing challenges we will face in the classroom. I am extremely concerned about what it means that we are now at a point in which we're trying to do virtual education. And it may appeal to some kids, but I see an awful lot of parents and young people who are frustrated, who don't know what to do, who don't know how to address this issue. And we have to continue to be vigilant. We cannot allow the circumstances of this pandemic to basically relax our standards, relax our expectations, as people would like for us to do, and to settle for what we know is not beneficial for our kids. And so most folks know I'm not accepting any excuses about the pandemic. I'm not accepting any excuses about the digital divide, because we created that digital divide. It has been there. We've known about it. The pandemic has simply focused it on us and made us realize that we are not prepared to live in the 21st century as we thought we were, that many people can live quite well in the 21st century, but many others are suffering and struggling, trying to make ends meet, trying to make sure they keep their families together, their homes together. The fact that we're thrusting sometimes distance learning onto families where education is not something that they're ready and prepared to do to help their children, has a tendency to refocus those challenges. And I say this as a practitioner. I want to make that clear, because I have 2 grandkids, and now I have some responsibility and participation in terms of distance learning. And I can only imagine, as I did when my kid was growing up, what parents must feel like, because I know that there were many times I had to supplement and engage and be involved in higher level kinds of activities. And I every time I did that and my kid would win an award or something, I'd always reflect and say, but what about the parent but the kid whose parent doesn't have a PhD and whose daddy is not a lawyer? What about those kids who don't have access to resources or access just to the kind of people that can help them? It bothers me immensely to begin to think about what this divide really is and how it shows up in those who at least afford to basically weather the storm. And so it is in that spirit that I come to you, recognizing that we can never, ever give up. We can never let out, and we can never give in to the fact that these issues exist, these divisions exist. And when these things happen, we have to even be more vigilant about the standards that we want, the accountability that we want, the things that are important. And I can't tell you how often people have a tendency to want to relax standards. We just mentioned 1835, which is a bill to basically make sure that those dollars that were promised to us some 6-7 years ago are going to the right people. And we've seen that it hasn't fulfilled its promise yet. And interestingly enough, folks are saying, well, Dr. Weber, don't make us do it this time. Give us the flexibility to use the money as we choose. And I'm shocked because I'm saying to myself, you have, and then they say, and we'll take care of those kids. And I have to laugh because I'm saying, when we had good times, when we had an increase in budget, when we had additional resources, you folks didn't take care of the kids then. What in the world make you think I'm crazy enough to believe that you will take care of these kids when you're limited and have limited resources, and you believe that you'll have limited resources? Do you think I'm going to believe all of a sudden you're going to make that great sacrifice and still meet the needs of these kids? I'm not that crazy. I always tell people, you tricked me the first time when you put me on that boat and told me I was going to a cruise and ended up in slavery. I won't be tricked again. And so we have to begin to make sure that these are difficult times, but nonetheless, we're vigilant about it. We're in a pandemic of hate. We're in a pandemic of health. We're in a pandemic of limited opportunity for so many. And it calls upon us, those of us who know the system, who know what's going on, who understand the challenges that are there. It calls upon us to really focus our energy and make sure that we're still giving the same kind of energy, if not more, than we've done before, and truly not settling for less, because the chickens will come home to roost in the lives of the young people that we serve, that we teach, and they will discover that this year, it was a year of loss. And you can't recapture it without some extraordinary efforts to do some extraordinary things to make a difference. And so every year counts, and this has to count as well. I've been asked to talk about Prop 16, and I have just a few minutes left to tell you about it. Some of you, if you're over the age of, if you're at least 50, you know what affirmative action is about. And you probably remember Proposition 209 that came on the ballot in 1996. So it's been 24 years since we have had Proposition 209 as into our Constitution. And we're only one of 9 states, I think, that has gotten rid of affirmative action. The other states have continued to benefit from it and continue to implement programs. Even though it's not a mandate, it is an opportunity to do so. 24 years ago, Ward Connerly put an initiative on the ballot under the premises that we should only be, as he said, king, judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. And that's true. We believe in that. And I have to constantly remind people that was King's dream. That wasn't his reality, but that was his dream. And that's what he was talking about working towards to accomplish. But he recognized that it didn't exist and that some extraordinary efforts had to be put in place. And so did President Kennedy and others realized that some extraordinary things had to be put in place that were called affirmative action, which meant things that were maybe out of the ordinary, but basically level the playing field, made it possible for people to be able to compete and to arrive at a state of competencies, so that we truly will be judged by the content of our character, not necessarily the color of our skin. But until we get there, affirmative action has a very serious role to play in helping us arrive at that end. When Prop 209 passed, it banned any opportunity to consider race or gender or ethnicity into contracting, into schools, and into employment. So that California could not look at itself and be honest about the challenges it faced and make sure that we had the right kind of programs in place that were there. Just as a brief example, before Prop 209, San Diego City Schools, I was on the Board of Education, And we had recognized that we had a tremendous problem with African-American males. Those who were even smart didn't want to be smart. They pretended they weren't smart. So we found ourselves at a graduation rate in the early 90s of where we only had 32 Black men who had a grade point average of B or better. And it was horrible. And so we said, this is not just San Diego, it was a national effort, national kind of crisis. And so we then began to ask ourselves a question, what can we do about this? And so we then decided to put together a program. It was the African American Achievement Program, a long name with a lot of initials in it. But in the end, we hired 4 African American men who were educated men, who were young men, who to work with the population at our highest population of African American schools, and to begin to build self-esteem. We also established an advisory committee of African American males who came to meetings to talk about what they could do to help with the program and those kinds of things. But as a result of that program, we then, Urban League wanted to honor the men. We saw an immediate increase in young men feeling proud about themselves, being better in the classroom, doing well. And as a result, we ended up with something like 400 or 500 young African-American men who had a B or better grade point average in their classes. No lowering of standards, but just were better. And I still meet some of these men today, young men who went to college and things like that, that had no idea that this was a possibility for them. We did the same thing with Latinas because we discovered that our young Latinas did not want to go to college, thought the coolest thing in the world was to find a husband and stay home and look at soap operas. That's what they would tell us all the time. We hired someone and developed a whole program to build a self-esteem, to help these young women get focused. And we began to see the increase in achievement, the increase in going to college, those kinds of things. Those are programs we could do by the district. When Prop 209 came into effect, we could no longer do those programs because they were based on race and they were based on gender. So we ended up having to take the 4 men where we concentrated these schools, scatter them across an entire district of 140,000 students. Same thing with our Latina program. And each one of those programs began to decline and to fail and to not reach the potential. And those schools that had that high achievement began to squander it and all kinds of things happened. And so we don't have that anymore. So what happened was it took away our opportunity to say, listen, let's identify what we need to do and focus on that and get it done to level the playing field, to make it possible that those kids who were suffering from racism and sexism and all those other things could then have an opportunity to compete. When we took away that opportunity, we took away our tool in our bag that allowed us to begin to change the trajectory of the lives of young people. This has been in existence for 24 years. Ever since I've been in the legislature for the last 8 years, everybody has wanted to talk about Prop 209. Everybody's been afraid to talk about Prop 209. They thought we couldn't get it done. They thought it was impossible. And so this past year, the Equal Justice Society came to me and talked with me about it. And we decided, the Black Caucus, California Legislative Black Caucus, decided that we would take this initiative up. And we asked our others to join us, the other caucuses, and they did. But they had some concerns about not being successful. The California Legislative Black Caucus was clear that if we don't try, we will never be successful. So if you have to risk failure in order to be successful. We were fortunate because it required a 2/3 vote, and everybody thought we couldn't get it done, that it wouldn't happen. And of course, George Floyd's death emphasized to people very clearly that there is inequality in California, that we needed to address these issues across the nation, and that California needed this tool to be able to basically change the trajectory of the lives of so many. And interestingly enough, we fought very hard on the floor to get it out. The Black Caucus fought with everything it had. And we ended up, people threw all kinds of rocks in our way, giving us the worst committee to go to, and you name it. In the end, we ended up with not just 2/3, but 75% of the people in the Assembly and the Senate voted for this bill, which immediately made it eligible to put on the ballot. And so it is Prop 16 that's there now. Prop 16, and it's gaining momentum. And it will be important because as you start talking about coming out of this pandemic, we start talking about coming out of this atmosphere of hate, we're going to need every tool we can to basically restore California, not to what it was, but to bring it back better than it was before. And a part of that is creating equal opportunity and access for our kids so that we can have STEM programs for girls in our schools. We can have African-American male projects that we support in our schools because that makes a difference in the lives of kids. I can then basically go and look at LCFF and say, hey, you know what? We don't have to talk about language and economics. We need to talk about race as well. And so get those African Americans who are at the bottom, persistently at the bottom, because of racism, not because their families are poor, but because of the things that are happening in their school and their communities. Go get those kids, identify them, and provide the resources, rather than having to talk in circles about, is it a language issue? Is it a this issue? Is it that issue? We can deal with the issue of race and finally begin to eliminate this achievement gap that is oftentimes based on race rather than economics. So we have an opportunity to be able to do this. Proposition 16 is on the ballot. It is a lifetime opportunity. I can't emphasize that enough. This is probably will be one of the most important votes that we will take in our lifetime. And it's interesting because somebody says, well, what about when we voted for Obama? No question, that was extremely important. We got it done. We got it done. But this has intergenerational impact. In other words, we have lost a generation of young people who did not have an opportunity to be looked at differently when it came to admissions to university or medical schools or law schools. We can't go out and recruit folks who we want to be in those programs. I remember quite shockingly, because I was chair of Africana Studies, and I had a number of people who died over the years and who were benefactors and supporters of the department. And they willed things to the department. They willed a scholarship program that was what they used to call heritage scholarships, a first generation African-American scholarship for a young person to come to the university. When Prop 209 went into effect, we had to alter all of those scholarships. We could no longer focus on the groups that we thought were significant and that we could do with our own money. I mean, if I gave a scholarship, I had to give it to the university, and then they could pick, they could basically identify what qualifications they wanted. But I could no longer say, you know, I'm a Black kid out of Pueblos of Los Angeles. I want to help some other Black kid be successful. I could no longer say that. I just had to say, here's the money, help somebody who might need it. And I could use economics as a variable, but I could not ensure with my own resources that I was going to help some other Shirley Nash Weber get through college and do the things that are essential. So we are really in a unique position right now, because we are faced with all kinds of things in the streets where issues are being raised, and you're going to see people fight back. They're going to fight back against these issues. We are adamant about the fact that Proposition 16 is really the most important thing that's on that ballot right now. There are a lot of things on the ballot that are very important, but this has intergenerational impact. And we have seen that in Prop 209, when Prop 209 came into effect with businesses. In San Diego, women and minority businesses were 40% of the contracts in San Diego. And we had developed a robust outreach program that helped them become engaged in terms of the economics. In less than 10 years, after I became chair of the Citizens Equal Opportunity Commission, and I began to hear all the cries and concerns about equal opportunity, I looked at the data, and the data showed us that we had gone from 40% of contracting with women and minorities to 1.5%. And when I went to LA recently, they told me their reality is there's a 2% for women, 2% for Latinos with all the people of color in Los Angeles, and less than 1% for African Americans in terms of contracting with the cities and the counties. This is criminal in many ways. And so this will provide us with an opportunity to begin to heal ourselves. I'm going to close with a quote that was LA Times yesterday. LA Times basically, the title was, they endorsed Proposition 16. They said, because the United States is not a meritocracy. It is not a meritocracy. Things are not based on somebody's merit. We'd like to believe that, but we know that it is not, that if you're wealthy, you still get an opportunity to get to the university. If you give enough money, they'll let you into this, that, or the other. If you remember the Board of Regents, you can get anybody in. And so we know that merit is important, but it is not the standard in this country. And the article with the LA Times concluded yesterday by saying, if we want to live in a country that better reflects our national narrative of equal opportunity, he said, we have to build it. In other words, if we want this country or this state to basically look like the folks that are here and really is a reflection of equal opportunity, he said, we have to build it. It doesn't exist right now. And he says, and that means using the right tools such as affirmative action. Vote yes on Proposition 16. I want to thank you so very much. We have hundreds and hundreds of those who are part of this initiative that are working very, very hard. And we know that each one of us has an array of friends that we can share this information with. But this is going to be the most important thing on that ballot right now. Not presidential stuff, we're going to get that done because that's always there. But make sure people go down the ballot, find Proposition 16, and vote yes on 16, because it will repeal the ban on affirmative action and allow us once again to basically address the critical issues that are faced in our communities, in our schools, and in this nation. So once again, thank you so very much for inviting me to be here. It's been great. I wish I could see and hug all of you like I normally do, but I know you know my love and my spirit, and I'm there with you. So thank you very much.
Dr. Weber, thank you again. I can't say how much I appreciate your leadership and advocacy right here in the state. It's so important. And you and I know that there are already many affirmative action programs that are happening throughout the state. We just don't call them that, and they don't benefit our students. So, and we had that college admission schedule. That was an affirmative action program, right? They just didn't call it that. So I just appreciate your advocacy and the support for Prop 16. I know CAAASA has lent our support for that, as well as my fraternity, the ones that I share with Congressman Scott there. So thank you again, and we'll do what we have to do to keep working with you on behalf of our students. We're going to bring on next another prominent member of the California Legislative Black Caucus. That's going to be Senator Holly Mitchell, and as you know, she was elected to the legislature in 2010. She represents California's 30th Senate District. She's an advocate for healthcare and education, and she currently chairs the Senate Select Committee on Social Determinants of Children's Well-Being. She's going to sit on one of our panels and participate on one of our panel topic conversations later on. But she's served on the powerful Senate Budget and Fiscal Review Committee also. She's the first African-American to do so. You might have heard that Senator Mitchell gained national attention about a year or two ago for authoring the Crown Act. This was a piece of legislation which passed in 2009 and bans discrimination against natural hairstyles by employers and public education institutions. Please join me in welcoming back to CAAASA. She's been a participant at our annual Professional Development Summit, and I think the roundup in previous years. Welcome back, Senator Holly Mitchell.
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to join you a little later to talk about an issue that's near and dear to my heart, and that's girls being pushed out. But I wanted to talk just a little bit about this morning about the Crown Act that you mentioned. The Crown Act was largely motivated by my experience witnessing young girls being suspended from school for wearing their hair in locks, twists, or braids. And we partnered with Dove, the Dove Coalition, which is comprised of any number of civil rights organizations from across the country, to really talk about systemic racism, because we acknowledge the fact that it's largely Black women and men who are limited in terms of personal choice of hairstyle at school and the workplace. And many of these cases gained national attention. The young wrestler in New Jersey 2 years ago who had his hair viciously cut right on the wrestling mat. Several young women in Louisiana. Most recently, the young man in Texas who was allowed to wear his locks all through his high school experience, but was told he wouldn't be able to participate in commencement ceremonies because of his hair, not because of his grades, not because of his behavior or any challenges the administration had with him on campus, but because of how he has chosen to wear his hair. So the Crown Act, creating a respectful and open world for natural hair, is a law that says hair is a race-based trait and natural hairstyles are protected under the law. And other race-based traits include race, age, gender, sexual orientation, religious preferences. And so we've added natural hair to that list of a race-based trait, just to make sure that it truly is protected under the law. And so we are pleased that 7 states have joined us in this effort, have passed their version of the Crown Act across the country. There are 2 bills that have been introduced in Congress. So hopefully it will become law of the land. In the meantime, we have a state-by-state strategy. And if people are interested in signing up and making sure that your family, friends, and neighbors in other states have the opportunity to express to their policymakers that they too want the right to choose how to wear their hair, because that's what this bill is all about. We suggest you go to the Crown Coalition. Just Google it online and you'll find the petition. You know, again, for me, this is a statement, a strong statement that says that a Euro standard of beauty does not define professionalism. And the grounds upon which people were being suspended from school, it was because the administrators at the school determined that their hair was a, quote, distraction to others. I didn't think that was appropriate. It disproportionately impacted Black students, and we felt it was wrong. So I was very proud to author the Crown Act, and very proud to be with you here today. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Mitchell. And I'm excited that you decided to be one of the breakout session presenters and facilitators as well. So we just appreciate your leadership. It does mean so much to have people like you fighting for our students in California. So like I said, this is CAAASA. We're fortunate, and you listen to some of these stories and you can see how all these are connected, right? When you're talking about students, and when you talk about students' experiences and having experiences and educational outcomes, why should hair be a factor in how we support students as they're moving through our educational system? And we know it has been, right? Because many of us
absolutely has been. It has been. And what occurred to me in the middle of this process was recognizing, you know, I'm a girl of the 80s, quite frankly, where we wore elaborate braids and beads. It was the thing to do. And I wore my hair braided all through high school and undergrad. And for me, that was an opportunity at that important age and stage of development to begin to fully embrace who I was as a Black woman and my culture. And when I think back, if I had not been allowed to do that as I was growing and developing, you know, how that would have impacted kind of who I am today. And so at those critical young ages, to not be allowed to embrace your culture fully and to be made to feel less than is offensive. And so again, that's why it was so deeply important to me. And the California Legislative Black Caucus, I know Dr. Weber was on. It was supported by the entire caucus. And so we're proud to have been the first state to take the lead.
Well, thank you. And for those of you that have chosen the breakout sessions, maybe you'll join Senator Mitchell in that breakout session. The other one I know that is a closely related topic. There's a topic number 5, empowering Black girls, addressing policies and practices that diminish and harm their potential. I remember reading some research article, I think it was Georgetown Poverty Law School, I think. Jamila Blake, one of the lead authors was that, and that inspired Dr. Tanya Fisher, who's the secretary of CAAASA, and myself to lead a workshop a couple years ago at the Casa conference on really piggybacking off that research on the adultification of Black girls. So CAASA, if these topics are of interest to you, we encourage you to continue to be engaged or to get engaged with CAASA. We just have a strong network of people, and we can strategize about how to make changes at the local, state, and national level in such a way that's good for our kids. So once again, let's keep going, and thank you again, Senator Mitchell. We appreciate your advocacy. So at this time, we're going to bring forward another one of our educational partners. In fact, they're on the flyer. We have the president of the Los Angeles County Alliance of Black School Educators, who will say a couple of remarks and then will reintroduce us to one of our legends, someone that has encouraged us to get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble. So with that, I turn it over to Nabia Broomfield, who's the president, once again, of the Los Angeles County Alliance of Black School Educators. Welcome.
My name is Nabiha Brumfield, and as said, I am the president of Los Angeles County Alliance of Black School Educators, and we are so happy you are here today. Our purpose as educators, Black educators, is to merge our knowledge, skills, and efforts for the specific purpose of ensuring that every Black child has an equal chance for success in school. As we come together today to learn, strategize, and unite our efforts and interests, you are needed to strengthen our coalitions for equity in education for African Americans. We move forward with our work today, and your energy is urgently needed, and we invite you to be a coalition member. We care, we make a difference, and we strive daily to build a better world for everyone. I would like to introduce you to our brother. He has been called the conscience of the U.S. Congress. He's dedicated to the highest ethical standards and moral principles, have won him the admiration of many of his colleagues on both sides of the aisle in the United States Congress. John Lewis dedicated his life to protecting human rights, securing civil liberties, and building what he called the beloved community in America. One of the most courageous persons the civil rights movement has produced, a genuine American hero, a moral leader. We honor our brother, Congressman John Lewis, whose life is a lesson in the fierce urgency of now. John Lewis, we present to you.
I heard Martin Luther King Jr. speaking when I was 15 years old in the 10th grade. And the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. inspired me to do all I could to get an education. As a child, I used to get up early in the morning, pack my book bag, and hide under the porch and wait for the school bus to come along and board that school bus. I didn't want to go to the field to work. I wanted to go to school and get an education. If someone had told me when I was growing up as a young child, attending a segregated public school, had to hand me down books, riding to school on a broken down school bus, that one day I would be a member of the House of Representatives, serving in the Congress for more than 22 years, meeting and working with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., meeting President Kennedy, getting to know Robert Kennedy, meeting Nelson Mandela, and traveling around the world. I would say, you're crazy, you're out of your mind, you don't know what you're talking about. Education is the great equalizer. I participated in sit-ins at segregated lunch counters and restaurants. We'd be sitting there in a nonviolent, peaceful fashion, waiting to be served, looking straight ahead, and someone would come up and spit on us, or put a lighted cigarette out in our hair, or down our backs, pull us off the lunch counter stools, start beating us. We would get arrested, and we would go to jail. But we believed in the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence. Before going on the sit-ins, we had studied the great religions of the world. We had studied Thoreau and civil disobedience. We had studied what Gandhi attempted to do in South Africa, what he accomplished in India. We studied what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was all about in Montgomery. My folks, my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents had told me over and over again not to get in trouble, not to get in the way when I asked them about segregation and racial discrimination. But I was deeply inspired by Dr. King and others to get in trouble. It was good trouble. It was necessary trouble to make our country a better place, to end segregation and racial discrimination in places of public accommodation, to bring down those signs. I got arrested a few times. As a matter of fact, I was arrested 40 times, in jail, beaten, left bloody on the Freedom Rides, and unconscious at the Greyhound bus station in Montgomery in May of 1961 when I was 21 years old. had a concussion on the bridge in Selma, Alabama, when we were marching for the right to vote. I thought I was going to die. I thought I saw death. But it all taught me the power of education, because education is powerful. That's what the Supreme Court decision was all about in 1954, when the Supreme Court of the United States of America ended legal segregation in public education. And today we must do what we can to see that all of our children, it doesn't matter whether they're black or white, a Latino, or Asian American, or Native American, get the best possible education. Education is a right. It is a civil right. So stand up for it, fight for it, speak up for it, speak out for education as a civil right.